Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the Creator Economy for B2B. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Robert Norum. Robert is a leading ABM consultant. He's been in the space as long or even longer than the term ABM has existed. He works across his own consultancy business, but also works within Propolis as well, B2B Marketing. I'm delighted to have him on the show, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Robert, thanks very much for joining us.
Great to join you, Marcus. Looking forward to our chat.
What has not changed, do you think, in ABM?
Yeah, great question, Marcus. Well, I think when ABM first started out, it was large enterprise organizations trying to work out how they could look after their most important customers and treat them in a fundamentally different way. So it was very much about personalized communications, looking at upsell, cross-sell, and moving those companies into becoming trusted partners and advocates for your business. And I think that's absolutely still, the mandate for ABM. What's changed, of course, is that people want to scale. And, one-to-one is obviously pretty time and resource and budget intensive. And over the years, people have found increasingly different ways, if you like, of how to scale. Simplistically, that started with moving to one-to-few, which was looking at groups of accounts with common needs, typically in an industry sector. And then, of course, the Martech players who came into the market, 6, 7, 8, probably 10 years ago now, have been driving an agenda where they're basically encouraging people to look at a volume play, using intent and using programmatic. So I think ABM is now a very broad church. And one of the challenges, I think, is that people often get confused as to what is ABM and what isn't ABM. And I think that's particularly true if you're thinking about leadership teams, where it becomes, it's a 3-letter acronym, but what does it actually mean to the business?
When I think of ABM, I think it kind of looks at three things. How can we reduce churn in a business? Expansion. How can you grow within an existing account base, whether that's new business lines or upsell opportunities? And then like net new business as well. How can you go after like those top tier accounts?
Well, I think fundamentally there's sort of the left and the right, if you like. Account-based, as I call it, is winning new customers. And I think ABM can be highly effective in doing that, perhaps using one-to-many for early stage pipeline creation and one-to-few and one-to-one, to land really big accounts. And ABX, account-based experience, if you like, is typically about how do you onboard your customers in an effective way, but then how do you obviously optimize their value realization, and ultimately how do you make them become advocates for your business. So I think that those two sort of key focus areas of new customers versus existing customers are both fair game within ABM. And there are a lot of nuances within that.
Depending on what the business goals are. We constantly see a different trend, like that kind of a trend cycle that comes through. Obviously, these key things are always core and important to a business. And you touched on it a moment ago about automation at scale. Have you seen kind of like any companies that kind of fall into that risk of like, look, these seem to be the leading companies. A lot of people are talking about these in the market. Why don't we get in? But then they don't necessarily deliver the results at the end of it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, Marcus. I think without question, there's been a constant stream of new Martech additions. It runs into the hundreds, if not thousands of companies that you could be using from an ABM point of view. And from that perspective, I think there is a danger that you go shopping for Martech before you've actually worked out what the fundamentals are for your business. So I think you don't want the tail wagging the dog, if you like. One is a very clear strategy, the right approach, smart account selection and segmentation. You want the business to be aligned to what you're trying to achieve. And then, of course, the Martech should follow along to enable you to do that. And I think very often marketeers, have been perhaps, tempted into buying lots of different platforms and tools to make them more effective. But all that's done is kind of accelerate the confusion. And it certainly hasn't resolved some of the fundamentals like leadership engagement and buy-in, like sales engagement and buy-in, and breaking down the silos in the organization. So I think the Martech actually just creates more silos, which is clearly a problem.
No, it's very true. What do you think when companies that you work with that get it right, like what are the fundamentals to kind of a simple enough strategy that can be interpreted by different business units within the organization, but then furthermore can actually be executed really well as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting question, Marcus. I mean, I think if you're in the enterprise space and you're selling to enterprise and you have a high value, complex sales cycle, then I would say ABM should be your primary go to market strategy. And I think even in companies that are doing it successfully today, very often ABM is seen as just another go to market, you know, that's sitting alongside what's going on in brand or industry marketing or channel or field marketing. And very often, I think, again, even within marketing, there are silos. I think the smart money is if ABM is actually the most effective go to market strategy for your organization, then how do you align the business to do that in the most effective way? And that starts, obviously, as we touched on, with buy in from leadership. But then it's really making some fundamental decisions based around where do we make our money, where are our most successful accounts, where are our key verticals, how do we tier and segment those accounts, and then how do we focus our resources in the right way. And that shouldn't be a marketing only play. That should be marketing, sales, customer success, even delivery teams, all focused around, the top 50, the top 100, the top 200 accounts. And of course, there will be new business pipeline coming in as well. But I still think fundamentally having a really clear cross-company strategy is what ABM is all about. And as I say, very often, even in companies doing it pretty well, it's still seen as an ABM play rather than a company play.
How does that look then? Like, let's say hypothetically, you're working with a company and they say, okay, we're strong in Europe, and these are our top, say, 50 accounts. And if we can land 20% of these within the next 18 months, that's a huge win for us for net new business. What do you see of like, what's the next step normally that looks good? Now, I know that depends on the vertical, different sales cycles, times and stuff as well, timing. But what would you say would be like kind of the next step once they identify those? There's alignment in the business. What does it look like to kind of get that in motion to see that you're on the right track?
Yeah, yeah. I would keep saying great question, Marcus, but it was. I talk about a sort of shift left, which is, before you get into the actual sales cycle, what have you got to do? And the first thing I think is account-based branding, which is how do you position your organization in an effective way to those 50 accounts you just mentioned? So, it's about awareness, it's about engagement, it's about positioning the brand in an appropriate way. It's starting to open doors and conversations. The second piece in that shift left play is the whole concept of the buying group, which obviously has been talked about a lot over the last couple of years. But if you work on the basis that, a buying group in B2B is typically between 10 and 20 people, that's a lot of people to cover. We need to understand who they are, and we need to start thinking about how we talk to them in their language. So if you imagine, this is a long-term complex sales cycle with a high-value solution at the end of it, we're obviously not going to be selling in 30 days or maybe even 60 or 90 days, but we are building the groundwork to build that level of credibility and trust. So I think that's where you start. And then, of course, the accounts that start to show serious engagement are the ones that you fast track, into working, perhaps, upgrading the type of activity that you're landing from a marketing point of view, but also getting BDR teams and sales involved at the appropriate stage.
If you think of how would you say, like, how does that look like to try and engage a buying group in an effective way? Like, even just some examples of like what they do. Like, I know that the digital play is one thing, but I think when you're talking about multi-million euro deals, it's not the traditional route of like, oh, they fill in a lead, then they talk to somebody, and then they're in the nurture phase. And then I'd love to see from what your perspective, when you see companies and you're like, okay, that's really clever what they're doing, that works. Like, any examples that you could share that you think of, like sometimes it's really simple, but it's actually really effective.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to talk specifically about.
Sure. No, I understand.
But I think the broader point of, the old concept of a lead or an MQ, as you touched on, is pretty much dead, I think, because that really is just a signal to say somebody in that business is showing some interest in something we do. What we've now got to do is to say, okay, if that's a signal, how do we circle back to the buying group and make sure we're engaging them effectively? Now, identifying that buying group is no trivial exercise, But even one of the startups I'm working with at the moment, called Agentive, a very interesting business, their whole platform, which is obviously AI driven, is about identifying the right accounts, identifying the opportunities within those accounts, identifying the buying groups, and then even the individuals within those, and then extraordinarily, then building psychographic profiling and then helping you get started. So from my point of view, that's the kind of play you want to be thinking about if you're thinking about a buying group. If you don't know who they are, first step is to identify them clearly. And then you need to start thinking about how you're going to engage each of those stakeholders in a way that will be relevant to them. It could start off with broad-based, brand positioning of who you are and what you do. But as you develop that relationship, you obviously need to start talking on a much more personalized basis to the different stakeholders based on their roles.
I think now with AI and we talked about the tech stacks there's so much noise in the market. Like from the clients that you work with now, what do you think is working to actually resonate with people in buying groups? What and versus what's not? I'm just curious from your own perspective of like, what do you see that's working in the market at the moment versus say trying to stand out from all the kind of generic messaging?
Yeah. Well, we haven't mentioned those two letters AI much. I think AI has transformed what you can do in ABM of scale and affordability. And I think the first piece is really driving the insight, so making sure you absolutely understand the business drivers and pain points for an industry. And then based on the account selection that you're looking at, in the old days, you might be doing in-depth research into a handful of accounts because that's what it was feasible. Now you're doing in-depth research into 20, 30, 50 accounts all simultaneously. So I think the research and insight and genuine understanding of a business is where it starts. Then I think, if you are, based on the tool I just mentioned, thinking about the individuals in the buying group, looking at their roles and even their psychographic profiling, then you can start to create bespoke messaging that's going to be highly efficient. And that wasn't possible even a year or two back, where AI, I think, has completely transformed the ABM space. I don't think we can just delegate our ABM program to an ABM platform or solution or agentic workflow. The tools are there. So insight is the key one, followed on, I think, by the personalization aspect, which of course also gives you scale. And then the reporting piece, I think, is also really important. And that's historically been a bit of a challenge within ABM, because if you're looking at a long-term sales cycle, how do you prove that you've really added value 12 or 18 months later? Reporting, I think, can also benefit from an AI-centric approach.
Definitely. I think the research thing is a huge thing, really getting the insight, because I think the more further you go up on the level of seniority in a company, it's less about the features and it's more about what they don't know and what information that you can give them that's useful for their day-to-day job. And if the features of your tool or the service that you have will do that, I think it adds a lot of value. When you look at like kind of the one-to-one messaging and stuff, what do you see is like, is it email that's working? Is it like in-mail on LinkedIn? Is it all a combination of those kind of things? Is it an events, or does it really depend on the customer and kind of where they are?
I think without question in most ABM, but certainly one-to-one and one-to-few, you need to be thinking about a multi-channel approach. So I think there is a danger that people think ABM is personalized LinkedIn advertising or email. Of course, those are two tools or routes to market you can use, but I think it's got to be a multi-channel approach. To some degree, different stakeholders, even within the same businesses, are going to engage with different types of content. Long form technical content, obviously for the technical buyer,
Yeah.
short form executive summaries for that senior management team. One of the things I've seen work really successfully in the last few years is actually really sophisticated and highly personalized direct mail. Where people are actually creating boxed items with multiple assets inside the boxes and having them hand delivered. One example is a company was targeting Volvo, and they sent this their manifesto, if you like, which was a physical piece of direct mail in an envelope that looked like an airbag. So if you're working at Volvo and you get an airbag in the post, there's a pretty good chance you're going to open it.
You're going to open it.
Seriously, yeah, exactly.
It's true though, isn't it? It's like we sometimes things are so obvious, but people don't really look at it. Like if you think about now, we talking about it earlier on about the tech stack and automation at scale. But like if you actually send a letter to somebody, not a lot of people are doing that. I know maybe some, like obviously some still are, but it's one way of definitely standing out now, as opposed to trying to automate and getting people's mailboxes and LinkedIn DMs and so on.
Absolutely. And if you think about the demographics, if you're dealing with a senior executive in a large scale banking organization, cliched, they're going to be of a certain age and a certain demographic. They may not be particularly socially savvy. They may not be on LinkedIn much. They probably aren't going to be opening their own emails. How do you get something to them that's going to stand out? Some years back, I was working with a client, and they were desperate to break into the CTO of Sanofi in Paris, and they tried all kinds of things, and this chap just wouldn't engage. And in the end, they sent him a gilt-edged invitation to lunch at a 3-star Michelin-star restaurant in Paris. And would you believe, of course, his PA called up and accepted. I think that's an example of where you have to think outside the box and do stuff that's clever, the attention of the individual you're trying to connect with.
Definitely. I spoke with there a couple of weeks ago, the head of B2B at HP, and in my LinkedIn days, I worked quite closely with them in their B2B transformation. But what he was telling me was really interesting was they have the partnership with Ferrari and Real Madrid, and how they look at that from ABM, because I was saying from a branding perspective, and they can measure it in branding, how many people they're reaching and the brand metrics and so on. That's quite standardized. But how they look at it for ABM is they will see when an RFP comes in for a client, they will see what's on the RFP, they will see what's not on it. So how can we measure the expansion opportunity? So they will bring them into Real Madrid, the stadium here in Madrid, or to Ferrari's headquarters in Italy, and they'll show them the technology, because both companies that they have the partnership, they're using HP's technology. So what they don't have on the RFP, and then they'll bring them to an experience, whether it's an F1 or a game. It's completely compliant, that it's like this is a business event because they're showcasing what their technology can do. But what they will do is then they will wait for like 90 days. Within the 90 days, if an expansion comes in on the opportunity, marketing get attributed to that. But if the deal continues and there's no expansion opportunity, there's no attribute to marketing. So I suppose it's for a company like that, okay, it's easy to do. Who doesn't want to go to a Real Madrid game and go to a Formula One? But I think it's really simple the way they do it, and they have a relatively small list of accounts. But he said the interesting big thing is that they're seeing a lot of expansion opportunities, but they're actually getting sales that are coming out and working directly with marketing now. So I think from what I see, like that's it. That's probably people can take like those kind of events, opportunities, as long as you're compliant. That can be a really way to engage people on the expansion part. Do you see anything like that with events that you've seen in the past as well, using them to kind of look and try and build broader relationships with buying groups that are unreachable?
Yeah, I think events are definitely a key component, of any ABM strategy. I mean, normally it's clearly not the first thing you start with. And you've been warming this account and these individuals up over time, then whatever it is, a breakfast round table, a dinner, maybe a corporate event at Real Madrid or whatever, all of those things I think have value. I've even seen some of the gifting companies doing very well recently. And whilst I take your point on compliance, if it's done in the right way to the right companies, hopefully the compliance thing isn't an issue. But gifting, I think, is still valid. I think it's got to be done sensitively and intelligently, but it's an option. And in some ways, I think, until you've tried something, you don't know whether it's going to work, or one account may not work with another. Something else you touched on, Marcus, was the whole attribution thing, which obviously has been a huge issue for marketing for so many years and has been one in ABM as well. I'm a great believer that attribution is really, again, a bit like the MQL, is something that should be rested permanently. Because I think if you've agreed you're going after an account or a set of accounts and you have a SWAT team on those accounts, then anybody that helps to move the dial should be part of the success story. It's a bit, if we take your Real Madrid analogy, there are 11 players on the pitch, maybe only the striker scores the goal, but the other 10 players have all been instrumental in moving that ball around perhaps 20 or 30 times before the ball's in the back of the net. If you said, well, the attribution is the striker, then take all the other players off the pitch and now say to the striker, okay, play you versus the other 11 and see how you do.
Yeah.
So I think attribution actually is a bit of a red herring. Of course, we have to be able to prove ROI, but I think the ROI should be at an account level or even at a sector level, rather than saying marketing did this, sales did that, etc.
It probably comes into the broader thing, is like what you mentioned as well around the tech stack. It's like the attribution tools kind of are favorable to the tech stack, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a better business outcome, because things can change. You're making decisions based on previous previous data. It's not necessarily forward looking.
So many dashboards track opens and clicks and downloads and visits to our website. Has that actually made a difference?
Like that kind of leads me to a broader question. Like from all the customers that you work with in ABM, and I know this is a massive generalization though, but like who actually, like if you're to say a rule of thumb, the ones that get it right, are they the ones that are like, okay, let's go with precision. We have a maximum of 50 accounts. This is what the goal is. We're prepared to move the team and the resources based on where the opportunities are arising, and we're agile enough to do that over the next 18 months or 24 months, as opposed to option B of going, let's get the tech stack. We have 500 accounts. We want to have as much coverage as possible. Once we get the early leading indicators of whether they're engaging, filling in the leads, then we will concentrate our resources. Like, okay, I'm not asking you to pick option A or option B, but what I'm kind of saying is to get a better idea of, like, you've been in this area for more than 2 decades, and you've probably seen it in all shapes and sizes. But like, is it like, would you be kind of say that precision is kind of like a key thing, and being agile enough to kind of move with where the demands of the business is kind of a key takeaway for ABM? Or is there, I know there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just curious from your perspective.
Well, I think if I picked up on those last few words, Marcus, the demands of the business are actually what should be driving ABM. And you can see significant upside in that account, then I think that's a laser guided one-to-one approach. If you're selling a 50K SaaS solution and volume is key, and you've got 25 hungry salespeople, across, then one-to-one probably isn't the right solution. You would probably be using one-to-many to be driving pipeline and opportunities. And you might be using one-to-few to the really significant accounts where perhaps there is a $500,000 type deal that's on the table. So I'm really keen. I think that people don't think ABM is ever a one size fits all. I think it has to be personalized to your business as much as it's personalized to your customers' businesses. At varying times over the last 15 years or so, people have said, oh, of course, the only real ABM is one-to-one. And I really don't buy that. That is strategic ABM at its purest. But I think, a one-to-few program where you pick 10 accounts in a key vertical and you do that really well, you create your value proposition and messaging just for the vertical. You probably even personalize the final or the last mile, if you like, to each of those 10 accounts. I think that's valid. And whilst you could debate, is doing one-to-many ABM to 100, 200, 500 companies, is that ABM? Well, I think it is, in the context that one-to-many ABM for me is effectively the new demand gen. Because if you pre-agreed those are the accounts we need to go after with the business, with sales buy-in, then there's never any debate about whether this is an interesting account or not, or whether it's a valid MQL, SQL, any other QL. It's basically one of the accounts we said we were going after, and we now have opportunity pipeline in that account. So a rather long answer, but I think your ABM strategy should be embedded in the needs of the business, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think sometimes there can be a lot of noise of, people that are kind of saying, no, this is what it is. And I think sometimes that serves what the value proposition to the tech stack is, but it doesn't always necessarily align with what actually the needs of the business are.
I mean, this is where I think it's so important that you define what ABM means for your organization and you get it bought in at a senior level. And then you engage, all the key stakeholders you're going to have to work with on the program: sales, marketing, customer success, even delivery. And if everybody is bought into the same vision, if you like, of what ABM could and should be doing, then you're in a good place.
When you look at that then from an organization standpoint, what do you think, what are the organizations that have the most successful execution? Is it that you have one champion and there's alignment with the other teams, or does it kind of nearly have to come from the board down to say, this is what we're working on? And, there's kind of buy-in from like nearly C-suite and above to make sure that there's the mandate there and that people are aligned with that? Or do you also need champions in the different functions as well?
I think probably it starts with the CMO and their team to realize that actually ABM is a smart strategy, but I definitely think it has to go up the food chain, or at least across the food chain. I think the CRO has to buy into it and want it. And I think ideally you have, even the CFO seeing that this is a really smart strategy. And if you think about, the market we're in now, where it's a tough economy for all kinds of reasons, I think the key word for ABM is focus. Let's focus our resources in the right place. Let's look at the accounts where we have the most opportunity for growth existing customers and business. But rather than having the old, scattergun, spray and pray type marketing where we hope we catch something, let's have a really laser guided approach to the accounts, the industries, the sectors that we think we're going to see the best possible return. I think if you have the CFO sitting there going, this makes absolute sense, then almost by default, you've got the CEO,
For sure.
That's a good place to be.
Definitely. Like that's a good point you mentioned, because I think a lot of people from, say, sales and marketing functions, it's the struggle of keeping the finance team on side that you're going in the right direction, that this is going to pay for itself. If you're starting an ABM program and let's say you're 6 months in, like what should a CMO or even a CRO be reporting to a CFO to keep their heart at bay that like things are going in the right direction? Like, is there any kind of metrics that you would share with a CFO to kind of go, look, this is working. You just have to give it time to catch up with the sales cycle?
Well, I think in a one-word answer, Marcus, it would be pipeline.
Yeah.
I think, that's what we're looking for. We obviously can't promise that deals are going to close on 30, 60, 90.
Sure. No.
Around that, of course, showing, well, we've identified X number of new contacts in each of these accounts. We've landed content. We've had this kind of engagement. They're coming to our events. They're talking to our sales team. Those are obviously softer metrics, but still have some relevance. And then once you've gone beyond pipeline, obviously, then you're getting into closing the deals, and that's nirvana. But in a 12-month sales cycle, that's not the super easiest thing to achieve.
No. So I guess it's setting the expectations from day one, really, but then sharing, like taking the pulse check on like pipeline velocity. What are the opportunities that have come in versus the, say, 12 months previously? If that's increased, I guess that's going to keep the CFO happy.
I think so. And I think also if you imagine you're creating your strategy at the outset of your program, if there are 10 key existing customers with massive growth opportunities, then focusing on those to some degree and making sure you can show the progress you're making, that's one metric. If you're looking at 50 accounts across 5 verticals, which you see as being mission critical growth or new business, then there are metrics that you would want to show there. And then if you're looking at the volume play, obviously it becomes a slightly lighter touch form of metric, but you're trying again, I think, without question, to show your driving pipeline, whatever guise that looks like.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think I certainly learned a lot, and so will the audience as well. For people that want to find out more about you, Robert, about the work that you do and any research that you share, where are you most active and where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest place to find me quickly is obviously on LinkedIn. And if anybody's engaged with B2B Marketing and Propolis, then I'm accessible through that community. But
Great.
If you want to approach me for a direct conversation, then probably LinkedIn is the place to start.
Great. We'll put your details on the show notes as well. Robert, thanks very much for joining us. It was great speaking with you and having you on the show.
Well, thanks for having us or having me, Marcus, and great to talk to somebody else in Spain, which doesn't...
Great. Thanks, Robert.
Okay. All the best.